Well, thank you very much for inviting me to Ilminster this evening in this lovely hall. It's great to be here. I'm going to be talking tonight about the Somerset Tree Strategy, and as Chris has just kindly said, about 18 months ago I was appointed to deliver it. But perhaps just as interestingly, at least I hope just as interestingly, I really want to talk about what kind of led me to this position, and I guess that's 40 years. I've been working in the forestry sector for 40 years. And I've had a great privilege of working in many different countries of the world. So I'm going to be kind of touching on that as we go through the presentation. When we think about trees, I don't know what you think about, but I think most people think of perhaps a beautiful, iconic oak tree at Longleat House or in a park, or perhaps a beautiful woodland, an ancient woodland. Less so, perhaps, trees in the hedgerows or trees in fields. But they, of course, make up our landscape. Just before Christmas, I went to Amsterdam for a few days, and I guess the highlight of the trip there was going to the Van Gogh Museum. And I hadn't quite appreciated just how many trees featured in his artwork. Something like 40% of his paintings have trees in some shape or form. This one's called the Olive Groves. And another artist's impression, of course, is exactly the same picture, but without the trees. It's not great, is it? And I guess our landscape, you think of our landscape, and perhaps almost subconsciously, we don't always notice the trees in our landscape, whether it's the hedge trees, the trees in the hedges, whether it's the trees in the fields, or indeed little pockets of woodlands. We kind of don't notice them quite so obviously as perhaps we should. But what is the Somerset Tree Strategy? Has anybody heard of the Somerset Tree Strategy, by the way? Okay, about half of you. Okay, that's fine. It was put together by a consortium of people. I've listed them on the left there. But there are 5 main objectives to it. The first is creating this wood culture. It's recognised in Somerset. Most people in Somerset love our trees, but we don't really have a culture. We don't have a woodland of culture. The resilience of our trees. Unfortunately, I guess due to climate change, but also with the introduction of new pests and pathogens and these type of things, a lot of the trees that are very, very dear to us are likely to be suffering in years to come. Already we're seeing signs of it. So if trees like the beech tree, for example, it can't really tolerate periods of drought, and it certainly can't tolerate periods of flooding or wetness. So it's fairly likely in our lifetimes that we're going to see a huge drop in the numbers of beech trees around the county. Birch is another one. There are numerous trees that are native. They've always been part of our culture, part of our history, and absolutely beloved to, I guess, everybody in this room. But really, their future looks a little bit gloomy. The third one, increase the number of trees. That, I guess, what excites most people. That's very, very difficult to achieve that, actually. More about that in a moment. Anyway, let's move on. And why is it important? Why is the Somerset Tree Strategy important? Well, just those figures on the left there, I feel sum it up really neatly. You look, France has a cover of 28%. Sweden's got 68% coverage of trees. Latvia is even higher than that. I think Latvia is about 70% coverage of trees. Right down at the bottom, Somerset at 7%. It's really not great. We're way, way behind the UK average. In fact, the England average is about 12 or 13%. Sorry, 12% I put there. So Somerset, below that. Not great at all, particularly for a county which, however way you look at it, is rural. There should be loads and loads of space for these trees, but we're not living up to expectations and hope. And there you can see the little green markers around there. And there, this is where our tree canopy is at its highest. And we all know where that is. That's the Somerset Levels. No trees in them at all, really. So we could do better. We could do a lot better. As the Somerset Tree Strategy was being written, the England Tree Strategy was also being created. And it was recognised that across the whole of our country, we need to get more trees in the ground for all the reasons, some of which I'll talk about later today. But the target in Somerset is to create 240 hectares of new woodland every year, and that's very, very difficult. Last year, I worked hard. I also had 2 colleagues doing my job, and I think we achieved about 60 hectares. So look, it's a start, but it's not really good enough. And the Friends of the Earth did a brilliant mapping exercise. We actually did this for the whole of England, just looking at, bearing in mind those figures from the England Tree Strategy. They looked at the whole of England and said, right, where can we put trees? We can't put them on Grade 1 agricultural land. We certainly shouldn't put them on any good farming land. Grade 2 agricultural land is also not great. You can't plant them in certain areas because it's a site of special scientific interest, or it's a priority habitat for calcareous grasslands. The Somerset levels, no good at all for trees because of a deep peat there. So where can we put them? And through this GIS targeting and heat map that Friends of the Earth must have spent hundreds, thousands and thousands of hours putting it together, created these sites. And the sites are in yellow. So you can see a few around there, all around there. Exmoor again, lots and lots of sites for trees up around Wells there. And the Somerset level's not great at all. So there are sites in our county, whereas if we believe this evidence, I've got no reason to dispute it, we could actually achieve that 240 hectare target. This is an interesting one. So this is a flood map of Somerset. And if you bear in mind what we're looking at on the previous map, isn't it interesting that the main flood area, all this area, where there are no trees at all, it's quite frightening, really. So what do we do about this? We all remember, I guess, what happened here in 2014, horrendous flooding across the Somerset levels and elsewhere, but no trees to mitigate against this. So we do have a problem on our hands. This is a little project in a place called Chewton Mendip I was involved in. And you can see, problems in the corner here. And the landowner said, James, look, this huge areas of my farm, they flood every year. What can we do? We've had the cost of putting drainage and land drains, all this kind of stuff in. And I said, look, in my opinion, a much, much cheaper option would be trees. It's not going to be so immediate. You put little trees like this, no benefit at all. But in 7 or 8 years, the roots will begin to percolate down through the ground, and the trees will respire, they'll absorb the moisture, and we would like to see problems like this beginning to dissipate. But look, there are a few interesting things here. Whoops, sorry. That's a pile of wood chip. When you plant a tree, what we want to do is you want to try and prevent the weeds and the perennial grasses, these competitive weeds and things coming up around the little young trees and I suppose suffocating them, deprive them of nutrients, deprive them of moisture. So a good way to address that is to put a generous pile of wood chips all around them. But wood chips are one of the main carriers of pests and pathogens, and certainly it's my belief that the reason ash dieback hit this country so badly is because of the use of ash in wood chips. It spread them around. It just spread it absolutely, disastrously and very, very rapidly. We're now seeing in wood chips all sorts of other pests and pathogens, fungi in particular, which were spreading around with the use of these things. So again, another problem. And so these plastic guards, lovely plastic guards, are very, very good quality. They'll last easily long enough, probably for 7 or 8 years, by which time the tree will be coming out and we can remove them. But the fact is, their half-life is probably, God knows what it is, 50 or 60 years. There's no obvious way of recycling them at the moment. And when I finished this plant, which was about 3 or 4 hectares, it was a relatively big one, I looked across and I thought, good grief, I managed to put now 3 or 4,000 plastic guards across this field. Is that great? Well, not really, is it? There are biodegradable ones we can buy now, but about double the price and not nearly as good. So again, there are problems of all these projects. This is, I'm from Compton Dundon. We have a little tree group in Compton Dundon, just half a dozen of us. This is a planting we were at just a weekend. And you can see the same problem. There's a field, it used to be an allotment, but all the allotment holders, they said, James, it's hopeless. It's flooding out every year. We can't really manage it properly. And so we're trying to address again the problem through trees. But the problem is with this, you can see this tree right in the foreground here. If this flooding continues, probably for only a few weeks, that's all it really is. These little saplings, they're just not going to survive. So it is a difficult problem. And the hedge, this is exactly the same field on the same day. You can see a hedge we planted. Actually, we planted that about a year ago. And of course, when we're talking about some of these issues, let's not forget the hedge is just as important. In fact, they can have greater benefits, I think, than trees. They can reduce flooding. You just look at the numbers of trees; they're a little bit more easily. They provide great shelter baits and, of course, great habitats for all sorts of fauna and flora. Also in that photograph, actually I think the next one might be better. Yeah, there you go. So it was a terrible day. The rain was lashing down, it was windy, but 15 or 16 minutes, all got out with our spades, we got stuck in there. And honestly, it was such fun. And in a funny sort of way, these dreadful, inclement conditions, they kind of brought us together as a group. Somebody bought some cider, we huddled under this tent, and we got on with it. And, I've made some new friends. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. So it's not just about the trees. And now, okay, it's only gone in for a week now, but people are saying, James, how are they all doing? Has the flood kind of subsided? Are the trees going? Everyone's got a real vested interest in this. Some of the trees in this planting were apple trees and fruit trees, and so people looking forward to coming together as a community in my village and actually, gathering the fruits in years to come. So it's not just about trees, there's more to it than that. And there you go, slightly pleasanter day. This is a planting just outside Glastonbury. I think it was something slightly kind of oldie-worldy about it, isn't it? I think it's magical. And on the left there, you can see, I just put down a list of just some of the benefits of trees. We're aware of kind of, the benefits associated with flooding, flood mitigation. We talked about that a little bit. But the first one right at the top, community engagement, I think that's so important. And increasingly now, people, landowners in particular, are saying, James, look, the trouble is if you put trees on our fields, absolutely understandable, we can't earn a living from it. You can we can plant the trees free of charge, no problem with that. And we can make small payments to farmers to maintain them. But it's very difficult for them. They say, look, that's it. It's a life-changing environment on the land, isn't it? They're going to be there forever, certainly for generations. So what can we do? And through carbon credits and also through biodiversity net gain, farmers can actually get quite decent payments now. So we're trying to really push this and actually glean a thorough understanding of these kind of benefits. And there you go, I just listed the sort of benefits that they might be able to achieve through that. It's not amazing amounts, but it's just as good as the amounts they could be earning off certain crops. I just recently completed an MSc in forestry, and the title of the MSc was, let's try and get this right, it was, why do volunteers plant trees? Why do you do it? Is it because of guilt mitigation? We all feel guilty, well, some of us feel guilty about our lifestyles. We all drive too much, we use the electricity, we go on international holidays and so on. There's a bit of a guilt associated with that. Or is it carbon sequestration? Are these the main reasons? Anyway, I came up with this questionnaire, and I asked 50 people how they would answer these questions. And the different numbers of a number of people out of 50 who either strongly agree, so there you go, why we need more trees to sequester carbon. So 3 people strongly disagreed with that comment when they're on a planting troblet. 38, there you go, 38 strongly agreed with that comment. So yeah, 38 out of 50 people strongly agreed that the reason they plant trees is to sequester carbon. And there's some interesting ones. In the UK, I think we're the 3rd largest importer of timber of any country in the world. It's quite shocking, really. We just do not grow enough timber. The timber markets, we cannot generate anything enough. Yeah, so this question here, we need more trees, we need more timber. Only 6 people agreed with that comment. It's strange, isn't it? And anyway, what I did with all these, so these are all the statistics, and what I did with them, I gave them something called a score. It's called a Likert score. This is not a method generated by me. It was generated by someone called Rensis Likert, I think in 1835 or something like that. And he came up with his theory. And it's perfect for a questionnaire like this. So what you can do is you give a score to each mark. And so if somebody strongly agrees with the comment, so up here, 38, you give 5 points to each of the strongly agree marks. Okay, so this sequester carbon, we get 38 times 5 points for that. if somebody strongly disagrees with a comment, they only get 1 point. Okay, so you can add up all the points, and you come up with with something like this. So this is a Likert score of that questionnaire. So these are exactly the same questions. I try to abbreviate them. The main reason, it would seem, that people want to plant trees is you look at the very top thing there, is because it's a fun day out. Forget sequestration, forget guilt, forget biodiversity, all these things. It's a fun day out. That's the main reason. But wow, how interesting. I was quite surprised, actually. The second main reason is because people, they say we just love trees. No real kind of thing, we just really love trees. And I guess we all do have a bit of a passion for them. So that's the second most important reason for going out. Right down at the bottom here, it's timber again, isn't it? Nobody really cares about timber. They plant trees because they love these trees. They're not thinking of chopping them down. And that's a bit ironic because I think 70% of all the trees in the UK are Sitka spruce, which are grown very, very specifically for a crop. They're grown for 60 or 70 years, chopped down, and be used in the building trade. I thought the fourth question is about a mystical relationship, a spiritual relationship we have with trees. Well, that's quite a strange one. I found that interesting, but a lot of people said no, very, very, very important. Flood mitigation, look, fourth from the bottom. And I found that, by the way, this questionnaire only took place in Somerset. It was just all the villages around here. And given how much we suffer from flooding, I found that strange. People didn't seem to care too much about flooding and the way that trees can mitigate against it. And then what I did is, I with exactly the same group of people, one person at a time, I said, right, are there any other reasons at all? Just tell me any other reasons why you've come on this volunteer tree planting project. Why are you planting trees on your free time? You're not going to benefit from it. And I recorded their answer. They could talk for as long as they like, for as short as they like. Some people said, look, there are no other reasons. And that's it. Some people spoke with passion and emotion for a good half hour. Interestingly, actually, quite a few people talked about commemorative trees, and the word Gaza came up a lot. And I found that interesting because the word Ukraine didn't come up once. That's strange, isn't it? Anyway, I then put all these recordings, hours and hours and hours of recording, probably 20 or 30 hours of recordings into a AI system. And I said, what I want you to do is come up with the 100 most commonly used words of all these recordings. And there's no real, and then produce this, okay? And the more often a word was used, the bigger the word represented here. So the word trees is no surprising at all. The word trees was used more often than any other word at all. And so what do you get from that? Well, what you can get is, well, people love talking about trees. They love their trees. That's the main reason. There are also some really interesting ones. The word hedge, which of course involves tree plants, it's right over there on the left. It barely features. It probably was used twice. So why were trees used, but not the word hedge at all? And you look at all these words here, every single word just about, it's very positive, isn't it? It's fun. That's a word, someone. Laugh. It's free, good, the word good, heal. All these words have come up, all really, really sort of positive words. And people didn't say, well, look, I've got a bad back, and this was made it worse. It's cold. The weather's awful. It's raining. It's snowy. It's hailing. Nobody said that. It's just all really, really positive words. There was one person, I said, well, what about you? And he said, well, I'm here because my mum told me I had to come. I said, anyway. Girls, that was a strange one. So it's quite a few, I don't know if you picked up on. So people say, well, I've been told if I come to an event like this, I might meet some nice girls. Well, boys didn't seem to feature very much, I'm afraid, but anyway. And people is really high. I've come here because I want to meet people. Interesting. So back to my little village in Compton Dunham. It was a very small primary school. In fact, it's so small, there are only 14 children there. It's a tiny little school. And I said, oh, by the way, you've got a little area of school grounds. Would you like me to come and plant some trees? I said, yeah. But they didn't see that as trees. They meant a tree. And I thought, oh, God. So I had to go along to this school. I spent 2 or 3 hours there planting a tree, which is a wild service tree. And I thought, how am I going to explain this? Is this a good use of my time? But, it it was definitely worthwhile because those children, they loved digging a little hole. I mean, there's only one hole to dig, so they took it in turns. They planted that tree. This is 2 or 3 years ago now. And that tree, I reckon it's the most loved, the most cared for tree in the whole of Somerset. It means so much. And when those kids, you sometimes see them walking around the village, say, oh, our tree is still doing really well. Aren't you the man who helped us? And it's absolutely brilliant. It just brought that little group of people together. So, I don't know, it's very important, some of these things. And I suppose that was, in a sense, it was a commemorative tree. It wasn't supposed to be. You can see what I've written on the left there. It wasn't supposed to be like that. I asked the kids why they wanted to plant this tree, and they overwhelmingly said, we want it to be a commemoration for all those poor children who died in Palestine. The Somerset Council have put this together. It's called Make Your Trees Count, and it's a tree planting register. And every time somebody plants a tree, whether it's a tree in their garden, whether it's a woodland project, we say, look, could you go onto our website and just record it? And it's very important. It's engaging an awful lot of people, actually. I think we've had over 200 people have entered their data now. And so we're getting a very, very clear idea of how many trees are being planted and whether we're actually trying to meet this 240 hectare target, which, as I said earlier, is proving to be quite a challenge. Quite a challenge for a whole variety of different reasons. But one of the ways I think I'm trying to sort of overcome part of this challenge, at least, is by encouraging communities to create tree nurseries. We've got a little bit of funding from this from a very, very generous donor. It's called Carbon Aware Productions. So if you get a chance, do please look at their website and perhaps donate. All the money goes into planting trees in Somerset. Anyway, this is a tree nursery. I didn't set this one up, by the way. I just went to have a look at it in Chewton Mendip. And I think it's great. You get people coming down here. They're engaging in the trees. There's a sense of ownership of these trees. And when they go out to their sort of their final destinations, of course, they're all local to the area, and they have that provenance. Why do they have that local provenance? Because people from Chewton Mendip, they go out and they gather seeds from that immediate area. And it's brilliant. So you can get these seeds. They look exactly the same as they would from Ilminster or Ilchester or Compton Dundon. The seeds look identical, but they're not. They're not. Genetically, they seem to be similar, but there's a resilience trees have to very, very specific areas. And as soon as you take them out of that area, it's extraordinary. The resilience just seems to kind of diminish slightly. Don't ask me why, because I don't know. But it is amazing how local that provenance can be. And it certainly works here. But what is it about trees? It's so strange, isn't it, our kind of relationship with them? But and that relationship, it goes back a long time. You think of the biblical references to the trees, the story of Adam and Eve. I suppose you could say it's more about a tree than it is about Adam or Eve. The comment I made at the bottom there, those are my statistics, so please don't take them literally. But I think that's about right. I certainly know that the average person does walk about 75,000 miles over the course of their life. Very, very roughly. We will all approximate that. And I also, through my fairly rough and ragged kind of theories, worked out as a tree moves like this. They're all moving in the wind all the time, even on a gentle day. They'll move about 75,000 miles, something like that. And I worked that out in various ways. I looked at I was looking at some 20-year-old oak saplings fairly recently. And it was a windy day, and I wonder how much they are moving. And you can measure it quite precisely. I thought, okay, that's a really windy day. What about when it's just a very gentle wind? And then you can work that average over the course of a year. I mean, you multiply that, many hundreds of times. It's a big old oak tree, can't you? But with younger trees, you can come up with a calculation. I found that's interesting. Maybe we have a kind of subconscious kind of recognition of that. I don't know. But there is something about them. They really, really kind of get to our heart, which is why, to go back to that slide with all those sort of those figures and question on it. The fourth most popular reason of planting trees is because of this mystical and spiritual relationship. Maybe the words mystical and spiritual aren't quite the right words, but there is something that just kind of ticks the heart of so many people, and the spirituality, of course. It was a project I'm involved in it's a huge area of India. It's called Karnataka, which is a kind of vast area of the south of India. It's a bit like saying the southwest of England, and it's that sort of size, big area. And I was drawn to it because a few years ago, I was listening to a brilliant speaker who was talking about the sacred forests of Karnataka. And she was saying that there were about 700 of them, which is a huge number of these sacred forests. But what she was not good at is explaining exactly what she meant by sacred forest. And I was drawn to this. And a couple of years ago, I went to this part of India, and perhaps I get slightly naive. I said, well, where are the sacred forests? Nobody knew what I was talking about. But you travel around, and the first time I went there, it was hopeless. I didn't really get anywhere at all. The second time I went around, I met this guide, and he said, well, there are these special areas. We don't really call them sacred. They're not Hindu, they're not Buddhist, they're certainly not Christian, they're not really anything, but we hold them in very, very high regard. And he took me to one of these places, and it probably wasn't much bigger than about 3 or 4 times the size of this room, so a fairly small area. But you go there and you think, wow, this is... There's something very special about this. And it was special because the trees are ancient. The tiny little bits of habitat in this little area are clearly ancient. But it was absolutely farmed to a hill, right up to the periphery of it. I thought, why is this bit being left? And he spoke to this guy, and he couldn't really give me an answer. Because it's very special. Nobody can touch this area. It would be very, very bad to touch this. Nobody can take anything from this. I thought, wow, that's interesting. Anyway, I got kind of tuned into this, and then over the course of the next couple of years, I went back to India kind of many times, just looking for these sacred forests, and I found numerous forests now. I don't even know how many, probably 50 or 60 of them, and I'm beginning to plot them, and they're all disparate, they're all fragmented, but they all have this magical property to them. And sometimes this photograph on the left is just of a tree, and I was driving down this little track in a tuk-tuk thing, and I thought, oh, there's something about that tree. And you look at these sacred symbols there, and I don't really know what they are. You think, clearly something has happened here. I had my family with me on this occasion, so we stopped the little tuk-tuk, and I got out and wandered off. My children said, come on, Dad. Anyway, I kind of walked past this tree into a tiny little area of woodland, and you thought, whoa, what is happening here? You could send a sort of shiver coming down your spine. There was something very, very special. My children, they came in afterwards, and they take the mickey out of me with the trees and say, Dad, we do not like this area. It doesn't feel right. It's strange, isn't it? And you walked in and it's exactly the same. There is something very, very deep and something very sacred about these sites. There's quite a lot of academic literature written about it, actually, just kind of beliefs and stories and what may or may not have happened. But what the points have in common is they're all held in sacred regard, and certainly all the people I've spoken to have got something to do with these sites. So whatever you do, you mustn't take anything from them. You mustn't chop a branch. You certainly don't chop a tree down. Nothing like that. You don't even take the fruit or the nuts from these forests. You just leave them in their entirety. Anyway, my project is looking at some of these sites. We're mapping them more and more and more. And I've got 1 or 2 colleagues now interested in helping me. Is try and actually link them up a little bit. So anyway, we'll see how that goes. Very close to here, there's a wood owned by someone called Merlin Sheldrake. Does that ring any bells? Yeah, he's written a brilliant book. It's called Entangled, I'm going to get it wrong, Entangled World, I think it's called. Have I got it right? Anyway, it's something like that. And he's a mycologist. And he said, James, look, I've got this little area of woodland. Could you come and help me create a management plan and plant 1 or 2 trees? We had this great day with him talking about his fungi and his experiments. And and I said, how did you get into this? And he said, well, actually, before I became a mycologist, I was a sound ecologist. I said, what does that mean? He said, right, this will really interest you. And he got these little probes, like little things like 2 knitting needles, I suppose, with some very, very simple sound recording devices. Just put them over your ears, and we're going to go up into the woods and stick them into a tree. Okay, and this is what I heard. Brilliant, absolutely amazing, isn't it? Anyway, it took quite a lot of time to get that recording, by the way, because it's very difficult to blot out the sound of the traffic and the noise. To really, really try and focus into it. So we heard that. And then he said, right, we're going to go to another tree now. And that, by the way, was a mature ash tree. It was a mature ash. And he then said, right, we're going to go to another tree now. And we're going to do exactly the same thing again. And it was another ash tree. And we stuck the same things in again. And you heard this sort of, I don't know how to describe, like a appalling sort of cacophony, kind of ragged noises and then silence. And he said, what did you think? And I said, well, it wasn't nearly as good as the first one. And he said, no, but look at the tree. And the tree had ash dieback. And he said, it's like, you would sound like that. He said, if you're suffering from a ghastly cancer or something like that, you're just not going to sound healthy. And you can tell an awful lot about a tree's health just by listening to this. Anyway, what was just as amazing, he said, what he can do now, and I've got no reason to disbelieve him at all, is he can walk around a wood, blindfolded, he can stick his probes in, and through sound, he can identify every single native British tree. Isn't that extraordinary? And quite where we go with that, I've got no idea. And whether that's a useful thing or not, I've got no idea. But I just found it absolutely intriguing. And I'm still not quite sure what to do with that fascinating bit of knowledge. But isn't that incredible? Anyway, moving on, out of our woodlands now to urban canopies and so on. I've been involved in a project, again, looking at the towns, Yeovil, Bridgewater, Taunton in particular, and we've been given some money to look at urban trees. This isn't a great photograph, actually. What I really wanted to show you is a photograph of an urban tree and show you just the benefits from them. And again, it goes back to this kind of community. There was a little scene I was watching, actually. It wasn't in this country, it was in New York, and there was a tree, a more mature tree, there's quite a big tree, actually, outside a shop. It was a hot, hot summer's day in New York, and everyone was walking past. Everyone seemed to be in a bit of a hurry, until they got to this tree, and it was extraordinary, because everybody was gathered under this tree because it was shady, because it was a sort of point of contact and so on. I thought, wow, what's that tree doing? And of course, the shopkeeper closest to that tree benefited enormously from it. Absolutely loved it. But I found that crime rate is interesting. That's straight from Avon Somerset Police, by the way. Prior to October the 7th, I was involved in a project in the West Bank and to a lesser extent in Gaza. And this is my hand-drawn map here. It's not very good. On the left, you can see the West Bank and the little strip of Gaza down on the left there. So I had an idea. It's called Masar, the Great Green Ribbon. Masar is the Arabic word for a sort of a journey or a path, a journey you might go on. And it's got a sort of slightly sort of spiritual element to it. So it's a spiritual journey. And the Great Green Ribbon, because what I wanted to do is plant trees all across the West Bank, linking a place called Tulkarm up in the north-east, right up to Jenin, and then down the sort of the Jordanian border into Jericho. So planting thousands and thousands of trees. And we got the project, we got some money for it, donated very generously actually by clerks, a lot of it was anyway, and also a lot of private donors to plant these trees. And it was going absolutely superbly. And people loved it. It was just extraordinary. That guy in the sort of beige-coloured hat there is a member of Hamas, and the guy kind of leaning on the door there in the kind of beige-coloured shirt is from Hezbollah. People from Hamas and Hezbollah, they don't talk. And the guy there in the brown coat, he's from the Palestinian Authority. They're all at conflict with each other. But you give them a tree, and here you can go, all communicating, all talking about how deep the hole should be, how they're going to water it. It was brilliant. It just brought people together. Had an all-women's project. Sadly, all but one of those women has now been killed in the ghastly conflict. And that's our coordinated the project on the left there. As you walk across the West Bank, and even more so in Gaza, I mean, there are beautiful bits of scenery, actually, but an awful lot of it goes through these towns and villages. And it's interesting because as we were planting these trees, hundreds and hundreds, thousands went into the ground. A lot of people saying, James, look, can we have trees in our community? What about our community? And I said, well, hang on, we're meant to be doing a ribbon. It can't be going off, looking like a spider's web rather than a ribbon. But it kind of worked. And I thought, the more people we can bring into this, the better. And it was incredible, absolutely incredible. The kind of positivity. And I remember one little girl came up to me and she said, do you know, Mr. James, this is the most positive thing that's happened ever in my life. God, 9 or 10, this is the most positive thing. Anyway, of course, October the 7th then came about, which put an end to the project, or so I thought. But it then turns out that in both Gaza and the West Bank, huge numbers of Palestinians who are associated with putting the trees in the ground are literally risking their lives, go out under gunfire to water the trees in the summer. It was just incredible. Not with water ground, little baked bean tins, and just anything, just to keep the trees alive. You're keeping the Israeli soldiers away from them, keeping the goats away from them. And still they're saying now, James, look, as soon as these horrors of the war are over, can you come back and continue the project? Because we don't think it's anywhere near finished. Well, it's not finished. Isn't it incredible? And so many people said, God, look, there is no hope for the West Bank and Gaza now. The world seems to be against us, and the Israelis are certainly against us. But we like to focus on this project. That's the focus. There's so many people's lives. It's really more than touching. It brings tears to my eyes, actually. And it's just the feeling of pride. I mean, you can see, it's not really a great photograph of the before and the after, but, that after photograph for, a relatively sort of godforsaken bit of the West Bank, it's just beautiful. You've got artists in painting these walls, immense pride and ownership of this. Lucy Larkin, I don't know if you've ever heard of her. I think she wrote that in about 1820. And this again is sorry, it's changing subjects a little bit again. This is an ash tree at Ham Hill Country Park. So what is that? Is that a diseased tree? Is it a dangerous tree? Should it be left? Should it be chopped down? I think it's rather a beautiful place, rather a beautiful tree. One of the problems, to go back to the statistics we're talking about planting our 240 hectares of woodland, and I've told you how much we've achieved, and it's slightly better this year. We might actually get up to 240 hectares this planting season. But what is not taken into account is the amount of trees that are chopped down. And that's, again, these are my statistics. So I researched them fairly carefully. And it's quite scary, actually. 90% of tree cover in the Mendips is ash. 16% of trees across the whole of Somerset are ash trees. It's a vast number of trees, one of the most common trees in the whole of our county. Nearly all of which are suffering to a greater or lesser extent from ash dieback. So should we be chopping them down? There are loads and loads of examples now of ash trees which are showing good resilience to dieback. Does anybody know what that tree on the left is, by the way? It's not an ash tree. I put it in very, very specific. It's actually an elm tree, and it's called Ulmus New Horizon. And it's an elm tree, I guess that's got to be 20 years old now. Absolutely perfect health. And it's almost identical to the English elm tree, which, is so beloved to many of us. I don't know if you even remember elm trees. I mean, I barely do. But of course, all over Somerset, Somerset was well known for its elm trees, and the ash took over. Now the ash is suffering as well. But there is hope for all of these trees. I put that in because I thought, look, ash, not ash dieback, so Dutch elm disease is a thing of the past. Absolutely horrific what it did to our landscape. But there really, really is hope. And these trees are coming back now. In fact, last year I planted my first ever stand of elm trees, which I hope will do very well. Oh, sorry, I meant to, just before I got to the last slide, one of the most beneficial trees for drought mitigation, one of the most beneficial trees to replace ash is the sycamore. A lot of people say, you can't plant sycamore trees, they're a weed, they're a pest, there are too many of them. Not a bit of it, I don't think. People felt very strongly when this one came down, didn't they? I think they're beautiful trees. And we talked about earlier, I was talking about beech trees perhaps suffering from a drought and suffering from flooding. Sycamore trees can resist that. They're very, very beneficial for flood mitigation. I think we'll do very well, with the sort of warmer climates which we're expecting in years to come. And a lot of my work is very positive. It's about putting trees in the ground. It's about woodland management. But I suppose one of the bits I kind of struggle with a little bit is about the safety of trees. Our tree, particularly ash trees on the side of roads, are they safe? And you look at them and you think, God, it's not great actually. It's got ash dieback. What's going to happen if it falls down? But look at those statistics. And I don't know. Read what you like from those statistics. So 6.4 people a year, on average, are killed as a result of trees falling on roads. It's not great for those 6.4, is it? But is that a lot? I don't know. I'm not sure how many people are killed on our roads for, from crashing and for other reasons, but it's a heck of a lot higher than that. So does that warrant felling huge numbers of ash trees down from the side of our tree? I guess it probably does, but I do struggle with it. And look at that little, there's that fact down at the bottom. So all the people in those 3 years, that's in the whole of all the people who died as a direct result of ash dieback were tree surgeons trying to chop down trees that had ash dieback. So tree management is a difficult one, isn't it? There's a mistletoe in this orchard. If the guy who owns this orchard leaves that mistletoe there, it will absolutely decimate. It probably is already beginning to decimate the orchard. So really, we should be taking the mistletoe out. If we take the mistletoe out, there's a moth that only feeds off mistletoe. So where does that go? I've noticed a lot of mistletoe, by the way, sort of spreading now to other trees. We're seeing a lot of the poplars. To my amazement, I'm beginning to see it on hawthorn, certainly around Compton Dun. You think, wow, it's really spreading. So we do need to manage these some of these problems. I took this photograph in Longleat, and my son goes biking on one of the sort of bike park things there. So I walk around and he's biking. And there's an old fallen down, well, this is a stump of an oak tree. And I walked past it a few times. This very learned guy kind of looking at it. And after about the second or third occasion walking, I said, look, sorry, I'm intrigued. What are you doing? You're looking at... And he said, well, I'm doing a PhD. And he's a mycologist rather than a forester, and he's looking at the fungi associated with this one piece of wood. And he said he's very surprised because he's already found, I think, 60 new species of fungi just on that wood. And so far, he's up to 2,400 species of fungi off one oak stump. I mean, good grief. And these are all microscopic ones. You and I couldn't see them. But he takes little samples. He goes out. He said, almost every little sample I've taken, there are many, many fungi within that. And almost always there's at least one new species. Isn't that extraordinary? You think, God, we talk about oak trees, a host, what is it? More fauna and flora than any other tree. But I've never heard a statistic quite like that. So we're way off. It seems to be host to thousands of these different things. Whether they same fungi would do well on an elm stump or a beech stump, who knows? But I thought, good grief, we don't know what's in these stumps. And we're all too tidy, aren't we? We all clear our rotten stumps around, tidy up our gardens and so on. But I think a bit of mess is very, very important. I put, again, a slightly incongruous photograph here. That's for real, by the way, that photograph. When I was doing my MSc, I was talking to another forester. I said, what are you doing your subject? And he said, I'm just looking at science. How do we get people to engage in forestry? Is it through signage? And these are his photographs. But he said, you look at what's the ones about, do they stop you doing? Do not climb onto timber tracks. He said, you often see that sign. So what are the first thing all the kids do? They want to go climbing on the timber stacks, don't they? Of course they do. No public access. Well, as soon as a lot of us see that, they think, well, I'm going to go in there. It sounds interesting. So how do you engage people? Don't know, really. What about that sign? Is that a good sign about it? It's rather beautiful, but I can't even read it. And by the way, if you can't read it, the ash brittle yew is one of the oldest trees in the whole of the UK. It's certainly, I think, the oldest tree in Somerset. And it was a mature tree. No, sorry, not a mature. It was recognised as a tree when Stonehenge was being built, being created. Incredible, really. There you go, yeah. Reputed to be over 3,000 years old, this tree was mature when Stonehenge was in use. Extraordinary. And if you haven't seen the ash brittle, it is well worth a visit. You think, good God. A more impressive one, and I'm not Compton Dundon biased, by the way, but a more impressive one, because you could see it more readily, is actually in the Compton Dundon churchyard. Absolutely incredible. It's certainly not 3,000 years old. I think it's about a mere 2,000 years old. And you look at it, you think, wow, what a tree. So I haven't got a photograph of it, but it's not so far from here, so do please visit our village. Yeah, it's just an old favourite. I rather like that one. You remember it, don't you? You all remember it. This is a project I was involved in with Tom Ovenden, and we were looking at the resilience of plants to drought. And I suppose common sense would suggest that if you put you do a mixed woodland, it would have a resilience to drought and other pests and pathogens. It's very interesting, actually, this experiment, because we don't always go according to plan, but we had monocultures of Sitka spruce. And we also had mixed plantations of Sitka spruce, of Scots pine, and of oak. And the experiment ran for, I think it was 9 years or thereabouts. And we found that over the course of those 9 years, the Sitka spruce monoculture had the best resilience to drought, but not only the woodland that we planted, but to other woodlands. So you think, well, I don't know, these monocultures, it's interesting. It's not quite what we were expecting. And then, by the way, the other cultures came up with something called compensatory growth. So once the drought years were over, they kind of caught up a little bit. So we did okay in the end. But when you're just looking at drought, actually, the monoculture, for some very, very strange reason, seemed to do a bit better. I mentioned this one. Has anybody heard of the ecological site classification tool? It's worth just bearing in mind, simply because if you're ever thinking of doing a planting, all you do, you just type in ecological site classification into Google, and it'll come up with this tool. And it then asks you what you want to do. And you say, look, you want to plant 200 or 300 trees in Ilminster, and this is the climate, and ideally you put in the soil conditions, so it's clay, it's peat, or whatever it is, and it'll come up with the best species that you can select for that site. So it's very it's so easy to use, and I think thoroughly worthwhile. And the more input you can give it, the better. And it'll ask you reasons you're doing it. Do you want biodiversity? Do you want carbon sequestration? What are the reasons for doing it? It'll come up with very, very good, normally native species lists. Just a couple of pictures here about what I call, I suppose, the wrong tree in the wrong place. This is in the Snowdon National Park, and you look at it, and it looks rather beautiful, doesn't it? You can see some lovely lime trees in the front here. You can't quite work out the trees in the background, but I'll tell you, it's a coniferous plantation, and it looks fine. Nothing wrong with that. But then this is a zone footage of exactly the same woodland, and it just looks really strange. And look at those kind of those severe edges around there. It just doesn't look natural. A lot of wood, I think that's wind damage coming in here. It might well be phytophthora coming in. It looks completely wrong. And as you walk around that, you think, whoever planted that probably 50 years ago was not thinking about the landscape at all. And the next photograph. Yeah, this is a little bit close to home in North Curry. So about 16 or 17 years ago, the Forestry Commission provided some money for a eucalyptus plantation. Well, it's not a bad idea, actually, because eucalyptus, it grows very quickly, it's not a bad crop, it certainly sequesters carbon, it's hopeless for biodiversity. But in this part of Curry, of North Curry, this area gets flooded, and eucalyptus can't tolerate flood for 1 second, so a whole lot died. There you go, completely dead. But then what happened, rather strangely, is I think about 2 years ago, the landowner said, look, it hasn't worked. We've got to remove all of this dead wood. Anyway, I was walking past the other day, and what have they replaced them with? Eucalyptus. I don't know what's gone wrong there. But also, the wrong tree in the wrong place. So this is, this is taken on Simmons Bath on Exmoor. So these beautiful rows of beech trees, and of course beech dominates that part of Exmoor. You look and you think, God, how could it be more beautiful? But at the time, these were not really recognised as native trees at all. And so was that the wrong tree in the wrong place? I didn't know. They've done okay there, haven't they? And I think Exmoor will be a reduced place in terms of biodiversity, in terms of aesthetics, in terms of many things, were it not for the beech trees. Okay, look, that's kind of come to the end. Just before we finish there's a little quiz, and I'm going to ask all of you this question. I wonder who might get the answer right. So it's about the rarest trees in the world, okay? Now, I was born in Yemen, and this tree is native to Yemen. It's called the dragon's blood tree. And there are various stands of them dotted around Yemen. I think there are about 30 or 40 stands up until the current conflict, and most of those stands are now being obliterated. Okay, so a very, very rare tree. Try and remember these trees, by the way, because I'm going to ask you which you think is the rarest one. This is a bit less interesting. Three Kings Kamoko in New Zealand. It was actually believed to be extinct until I think it was about 1940, something like that. And then it was found again, and there it is. The Wollemi pine. This one was actually taken in Curry Rival. But the Wollemi pine is interesting. So it was recognised as extinct, and it was classed as extinct until an explorer was doing a bit of, no, wasn't an explorer? Anyway, somebody was exploring one of the national parks in southern Australia and found a tiny little stand of 4 or 5 trees in somewhere called the Wollemi National Park. And he looked and thought, God, they look very odd, these trees. And he took some photographs, and they were then identified as this previously recognised as extinct species. So what happened is that the area has now been kind of fenced off, and cutting has been taken, which is why my friend in Curry Rather managed to get, God knows how much he paid for it, he managed to get one of these cuttings. They're rather a beautiful tree. And it was believed, fossil evidence suggesting they were around at the time of the dinosaurs, about 65 million years ago. The black poplar, Somerset is the last stronghold in the whole of UK for the black poplars, and it's the females that are very, very rare. There are more female black pandas in the world than there are female black poplars. So 600, to be precise, there are 600 black poplars. And two trees which of course are from Somerset, so the cheddar whitebeam, found only in the Cheddar Gorge, and an interesting one called the no parking whitebeam, which are only one of a few species. Called the no parking whitebeam because there it was a whitebeam. Somebody whacked a big sign out saying no parking, and it's found to be an incredibly rare species of whitebeam, found only on the Exmoor National Park. There's only 2 or 3 that have ever been found since. So, and its Latin name, I can't remember what it is, quite Sorbus something or other, but it's translated as Sorbus no parking. So 2 very rare trees. Whoops. Anyway, which of those do people think is the rarest? Should we go back over and kind of hands up if you think it was the dragon's blood tree? Nobody? Okay, a couple of people. 3 Kings Kameko? 1 person only? 2 people, okay. The Wollemi pine, extinct until quite recently. Oh, okay, only 1 person. The black poplar? Okay. The cheddar whitebeam, very rare, found only in the Cheddar Gorge, okay. The no parking whitebeam. I think I've got the popular vote. Well, the answer is this funny little thing. It's not a very exciting tree. It does grow up to about 12 metres. It's dioecious, which means it's either male or female, and up until 1994, there was only a male has been found. Well, and that's it, it's a male. Okay. Now, rather strangely, that male then produced fruit, one of which is female, but then the fruit died or was eaten or something, so there's still one in the world. The future of this poor 3 Kings Kamoko is a bit gloomy. I just love that quote. When I started my life in forestry, the professor was teaching me, said, James, what you've got to remember is, look, anybody can stand up, any forester can stand up and talk about trees or use Latin names, and that would be brilliant identification, but trees is much more about people, or forestry is much more about people than it is about trees. I think it's so true. We get people on board, they love them, they care for them, we look at timber, all these things. And so I think Jack Westby in 1967 really, really hit on the truth with that. Anyway, thank you very much.